We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
The carefully balanced political system that exists in the United States can be so easily upset. And we've had just such an instance this last week with Senator Dianne Feinstein of California asking to be removed temporarily from her committee duties. Now, what kind of mayhem and shenanigans does this unload on us? Well, to find that out, we're joined by author James Fight to get to the bottom of the matter. Thanks for being here, Jim.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
So, Jim, Senator Feinstein, she has asked to be temporarily removed from her committee assignments and then somebody put in place so Congress, Senate, can push forward with getting judicial nominees on the books. What's the issue? Why is this unlikely to happen?
Well, it's unlikely to happen, Mark, because what's required to replace her on the committee right now, because she's not actually, I mean, she's still alive and she's still in Congress. She's just out with shingles. Not to belittle shingles, it's horrible, but I mean, she can't come to work, but she still has the job. So what's required to replace her is actually
it's replace her on the committee.
On the committee, yes, of course, not in the Senate in general. Is a full vote of the Senate, of which they would need a 60-vote majority. That's not going to happen.
Right. So, yeah, it would require almost a dozen lawmakers, Republican lawmakers, to side with Democrats. And here's the thing, Jim. If they were to, that would mean that the nomination committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, could go ahead with nominations. Now, I guess there's two aspects here. I think it's quite obvious why Republicans wouldn't want judicial nominations to go ahead, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's kind of funny. I don't want to make it sound like it's funny that she has singles is horrible, but it's funny, Mark, that the way it's being couched. Like, there are a lot of Republican senators who are saying, "Oh, well, no, we have too much respect." I'm paraphrasing, of course. Too much respect for Dianne Feinstein to push her out, and she's over here actually asking to be replaced. It's not even it's not like a battle to push her out. But yeah, we've seen a lot of, especially here lately, we've seen a lot of partisan action in Congress, the Senate and the House and in the committees. And what we've been seeing with a lot of nominations, presidential nominations, is we'll have people who are, according to the other side, whether that's Republicans or Democrats, according to the other side, they're activists, and they're not good bipartisan choices. And so you'll have the minority party saying, no, we don't want that person. The majority party, if they can get a slim majority or even a tiebreaker with Kamala Harris, to just push through, is what we've been seeing here lately. So of course, the Republicans, while they can deadlock the Senate Judiciary Committee 10-10, and there is no VP stepping in to break a tie, of course they're not going to do it.
Yeah, so that kind of brings us to the wider question, isn't it? In fact, isn't a very partisan Senate, and this is I've heard this from a number of areas, but isn't a highly partisan Senate and House, for that matter, that is evenly split, meaning that legislation doesn't get passed, nominees don't get passed. I've heard from a number of places that this is probably better for America, isn't it? If nothing's happening, isn't that actually?
Yeah, there are varying versions of a saying that I'll kind of paraphrase just to keep the language clean. But basically, if they're focused on each other, they can't mess us over. And
right,
it's when they're working together that you really got to be afraid. But no. What we've got to remember is the reason that Congress in general, but especially the Senate, was designed the way it was, which, by the way, it does not function as it was originally designed today. And maybe we can get into that here in a minute. I don't know. But the reason it was designed the way it was specifically so that a slim majority of people couldn't lord their power over everyone else in the country, so that 51 people couldn't dictate policy for 49 people. It's called the tyranny of the majority, and
Yeah.
that's the whole reason that we're a republic and not strictly a pure democracy.
So, what would actually happen if everything were deadlocked? Would government just continue at a status quo? Or would there be various things? I'm thinking specifically here, like the debt limit argument that's taking place in Congress at the moment. But would things essentially just tick over until a debt limit budget or a new budget for defense comes due?
Yeah, pretty much. Of course, there's a deal in the works to go ahead and raise the debt limit. I mean, that's as a Liberty Nation economics editor Andrew Moran said, it's sad but predictable that eventually Republicans are going to cave and increase the debt limit, and I agree with him on that. But the thing on that is, if nothing changes, then that means it has to stay the same. So yes, it will be the status quo, and that's not the great disaster that everyone, well, not everyone, but that a lot of people seem to think it's going to be. We're talking about having the same amount of money to spend for this year as we did fiscal year last year. Well, what didn't happen last year? Society didn't collapse. The government didn't go belly up. If it was enough money to run things a year ago or 10 years ago, guess what? It's probably still enough money to run things today.
So the issue of committee roles not being filled or not being fully staffed, this is a problem that doesn't require a solution, isn't it?
Well, that's my personal opinion, and I think that's probably the opinion of most people that love liberty, and more importantly, I guess, or more relevantly, I should say, they don't like the idea of an ever growing government, right? The thing is, we started when the Constitution was put into place. We started with a lot of liberty, and then as the federal code grew over the years, very few of those laws actually advance liberty. For the most part, putting laws in place restricts it, and in some cases, that's good, I suppose. I mean, we shouldn't just be allowed to murder folks, of course, but
I,
but
I
the
don't I
vast
don't
majority
think
of
it was
legislation.
explicitly written in the Constitution that murder's fine.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? Like it wasn't. Hey, but it wasn't explicitly banned in the Constitution either. But but that was kind of a. I mean, there's not a state in the country where it's okay to murder someone, and that's the bigger issue. Is this nation was envisioned as a republic of, well, I almost said of 50. Obviously, it wasn't originally 50, but of several more or less sovereign states. So, and that's why, before the early 1900s, 1913, I think it was, with the 17th Amendment, when that's why senators weren't elected directly by the popular vote, right? They were elected by individual state legislatures. And so, of course, today it's a direct, they're directly elected along with the U.S. House. The Senate was never intended to be the people's house. That was the House of Representatives. Former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, a Democrat, he's actually the guy who started the whole nuking the filibuster process back in 2013. In 2019, he argued that we should just do away with the filibuster entirely. He said, "What?" I'm paraphrasing again, of course, but he said, what sense does it make to require 60% of the vote? Well, the sense that the sense it makes is that one person over half can't dictate policy for everyone else.
The tyranny of the majority,
Tyranny of the
indeed.
majority, yes.
James Fight, thank you ever so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Mark.
And that's almost all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'd like to thank our guests, Joe Schaefer, Andrew Moran, and James Fight, and extend my gratitude to you, the listeners, for being here with us today. A final thought before we shut down for one more week. I'd like to ask a question. How do we sort fact from fiction? Now, our own memories falter. We relate stories like a game of telephone where the message gets corrupted with each iteration. So we ourselves are not reliable narrators of the events of the age. For that, we rely on books, and in the modern realm, the news media to be the record keeper. But what happens when the record keeper is corrupt and driven by an ideological agenda? Well, it seems to me that our historical record becomes worthless, and with that, all lessons are lost. meaning that future generations are doomed to make the same mistakes again and again. And that might be the very real tragedy that this fourth estate dereliction of duty has brought about. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner. Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.